Well, welcome back to the Loft for the fourth part of our 5-part series on the Gospel of John and the first few chapters, Life but Not As We Know It. And as you're probably aware by now, we've reached the letter F in our acrostic of life, L-I-F-E, and we'll be concluding next week with the letter E, God willing. So this week, the word we've chosen for the letter F is following, and it's a word follow or following that we find an awful lot in life, and certainly in this Gospel of John, and it is a very powerful and very strong theme for all of us, whether we are people of faith or not. I want to look at three aspects of this. First of all, that following is from infancy. Secondly, that we do it intentionally, and thirdly, that we do it involuntary. I'm sure there's many other ways we do it, but in the time that we've got today, I'd just like to look at those three aspects. First of all, we do it from infancy. We have two grandsons, as many of you are aware, who live in Swansea, and during this period of lockdown we've seen a number of videos of them, and obviously we video called them, and it's been good to do that. But certainly when you watch them together, and you look at Jack, who is the younger one, looking at his older brother Harrison, then you can see that he's constantly watching him, and he's constantly looking to emulate him and following what he's doing himself, and that is quite a natural human trait to do that. And all of us from our infancy, whether we have older brothers or sisters or younger ones or not, will be following after individuals, wanted to be like mum, wanted to be like dad in certain ways. And so it is a natural part of what we are, that we imitate and we follow other people. So that's from infancy. And then of course we do it intentionally. One example of this would be when we're teenagers. We will have heroes, maybe those in the music world, maybe those in the world of cinema, and we will have maybe posters on our wall because we follow those particular individuals, and everything that they do is important to us. So we may buy magazines to find out what their favourite food is, what they enjoy for breakfast, and all sort of minutiae about their lives becomes important because we're following them. And then of course the other aspect to this is that we do things involuntary, and we follow, and things we'd rather not do. I can remember coming back from America about 15 years ago, and I was up in this room, I think, doing something here, and my wife called me, and I shouted down, or she shouted up, dinner's ready, and I shouted down, "Oh, I'm almost done." Now, it's not a phrase that I would ever have used before I went to the States, and I was only there for 2 weeks. But somehow in the time that I was there, my mentality changed and my vocabulary changed, just maybe for a short while, and I used that phrase. And so sometimes these things will come upon us in an involuntary way. I had a friend, and you may be listening to this at some point, who went to Australia. I won't identify him and embarrass him, but he went to Australia when he was a young boy, only for 4 or 5 years. He came back, and even though he's my age now, approaching the age of 60, he still has an Australian twang to a lot of what he says. And so when we immerse ourselves in an environment, then even in an involuntary way, we take on board, we follow after the local traits, the local language, the local peculiarities, and whatever they are. So in life, whether we like it or not, we're all followers of something or someone. Now, of course, we sometimes aren't very loyal, as I've already pointed out with my comment from this room that I'm done. We can switch the way that we do things within our life. If that wasn't the case, then millions and millions of pounds wouldn't be spent on advertising. If we were just going to be the same way as we always are, we were going to use the same brand of washing powder and all the other things that we consume and we choose in life. And so therefore the ones we follow the people we follow and the trends we follow can change. And I suppose as we look back through our lives, we can see that happening to us. And these things can be embedded in our head. I mean, many who are my age will remember the old shake and vac adverts. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. That was something for your carpets, which I'm sure you'll find if you want to look back at that on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find it there. But it was a catchy tune that sort of stayed in your mind and persuaded you to actually buy their particular product, switch from one to the other. So whether we're toddlers, whether we're teenagers, whether we're workers in the workplace, and we're aspiring to follow after someone and their career and their success, or whether we're just on Twitter and we want lots of followers and we are following lots of people on social media, then following is part of life. Now, of course, that can be for good or for bad, depending on who we're following. In sport, sometimes you can have a sporting team. I'm passionate about football, as many of you know, and sometimes a team can be right at the bottom of the league and they can be heading towards relegation, and suddenly they bring a person in, a new manager, and suddenly the teams are transformed. The team is transformed by this one individual, because they're all following after him now, and they're going in a much better way and playing much better than they were before. So one individual can make all the difference. This month, 40 years ago, many of us football fans were waiting for the European Cup final, and Nottingham Forest actually were going to be playing in what is now called the Champions League for that particular event. Now, the man who had taken charge of them only a few years earlier was a man by the name of Brian Clough, who many of you will know, and he'd gone to that club. And in 1978, he'd taken them in the late 70s up to the First Division, which is now the Premiership. And in 1978, he won the top division in England. And it was amazing, because when he took them over, they were just near the bottom of the old Second Division. And to prove it wasn't a fluke, he actually won it the following year as well, beating Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester United, Chelsea, Man City, and all the other great English sides. But of course, when you win that, you go into Europe. And in 1979, they beat Malmo, I think, from Sweden in the final. And then in 1980, this month of May 1980, 40 years ago, they were due to play SV Hamburg. And in that particular game, Brian Clough, who obviously was going to make history by winning the European Championship twice on the trot, for an English side to do that was just unthinkable, particularly an old Second Division English team. But that's exactly what happened. And before the match, they asked him what was going to happen in the game, and he said, "We will win 1-0 and John Robertson will score the goal." Well, you can look it up yourself. In the 21st minute, John Robertson scored the only goal of the game, and they won 1-0. So Brian Clough was a one-off. And you might say, well, wow, it'd be great if he could have been manager of my team. And many of us thought that at the time, and many of us thought he should have become England manager. But 13 years later, he was manager of Nottingham Forest again, and in that particular year, they were relegated. So even the greatest, even those that have just reached the unbelievable heights in their profession, can sometime later maybe be not so good. And so when we're looking to follow someone, we're looking for consistency as well as brilliance. We were only thinking in one of our talks recently about science, and the government saying that they're following the science. And Professor Brian Cox was on the Andrew Marr show on a Sunday morning and was talking about that. And he was explaining that 95% of everything in the universe is dark matter. And he said, we don't know what that is. We don't know what that is. So even science has no knowledge of 95% of everything. And so again, when we're following after somebody, we want it to be somebody who has total knowledge, if at all possible. After all, if you were going over a minefield and the expert advising you said, well, we know 5% of the ground you're going to walk on, and we can tell you 5% of it doesn't have mines in it, then you're going to take a risk with the 95% that they don't know. And so going forward and who we follow is so important. I mentioned you Dr. Edwin Orr a number of times, a great preacher that's now with the Lord. And when he was in the American Army as a padre many years ago, he would see the men as they came into the camp, and he would say, look, I'm always here, my door's always open, and you can come and see me. And one guy said to him, I'm not sure it was more than one, but this particular guy was very outspoken. He said, well, look, I'm an atheist, I won't need to see you. And so he said, well, if you get a bit bored, he said, you want a cup of tea, I'll make you a cup of tea, we can have a few biscuits, and in 2 minutes I will convert you from atheism. He said, and so this young man said, oh right, okay, and walked out. Well, sometime later he thought he'd give it a try, so he went to see Dr. Orr, and he said to him, well, come on and convert me. So he said, well, how much do you know? He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, if total knowledge is 100%, how much do you know of everything? And he said, well, it'd be less than 1%. He said, well, should we round you up to 1%? And I'll put myself down for 1% as well. So he said, okay, that seems reasonable, yeah. So then he asked him, is it possible outside the 1% of your knowledge, in the other 99%, that God could exist? So he said, yes, I suppose he could. He said, well, congratulations. And he shook his hand. He said, you've now become an agnostic. So he said, I thought I was an atheist. He said, well, you were, but you're now an agnostic. He said, what's one of those? Well, an agnostic admits he doesn't know if there's a God. So he said that you're one of those now, and I do know. So if you want another cup of tea, another biscuit, sit down and I'll tell you. So they had their conversation. So it's good to know why we're following, what we're following as well, and to know exactly where we stand, particularly in relation to important matters in life. Now I've just got a reading for us today from Matthew chapter 16, and in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Now, of course, that's from Matthew's Gospel. But the characters that we've already been thinking of in John's Gospel are those that did exactly that. There was Nicodemus, who we thought of in John chapter 3, and he was willing to take up his cross and follow Christ. And we'll be just thinking as we finish in a moment what that really means. And there was the woman at the well in chapter 4, who actually went back and declared that she was now following Jesus Christ, and come and see this man who knows everything about me, the man who does know everything, who has total knowledge, come and meet him. And the whole of that area of Samaria was transformed the next time we read about it, with those that believed in the Lord Jesus Christ. And what Jesus is pointing out here is that there is a cost involved in that. But of course, the other thing that gives us when we follow one who is God, when we follow one who has the answers, who does know all things and can do all things if we ask him, is the one who can also give us peace. In 1520, a man by the name of Ferdinand Magellan was captain of a ship that was trying to travel around from the Atlantic, trying to travel around the southern part or the coast of South America. And in doing that, there were many problems. There were ice flows, there was raging seas, and at one stage he had a mutiny on his hands on board, and people, didn't want to follow after him as their captain. They thought he was going to get them killed. And those straits where they were today, if you look on the map, they're called the Straits of Magellan. And as they came through that really testing time on board that ship, they actually eventually came into more peaceful waters. And those waters, we know them today as the largest ocean in the world. And Magellan named them the peaceful one. He said, here we have arrived at the peaceful one. And that is where we get the word pacify. And of course, this is where we get the name Pacific Ocean. And so he was the one that named the Pacific Ocean and had those straits named after him. And we may feel at the moment that we are very much like those people on board that ship, that we are in these terrible straits at the moment, that the waves are, even though it's a lovely sunny day today, as a nation we're sort of being tossed this way and that way in the midst of this terrible pandemic that we're suffering with the rest of the world at the moment. But there's someone who can bring peace even in the storm. You remember Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, and there was a tremendous storm, and he was asleep on board the vessel, and the disciples couldn't understand this. But when they understand who he was and what he could do, maybe they reflected as to why he was asleep on board the vessel that particular night. And he got up and he said, "Peace, be still." And there's a lovely verse in the Bible where the Lord Jesus says, "My peace I give to you." And if we want the peace, even amid this storm that we're all in at the moment, if we want that peace, we simply have to ask him and invite him into our lives. The one who said, "I am the way, the truth and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me." He's the way. And through those difficult waters around South America, they had to find the right way. He's the truth. They needed to rely on the information they had, and he is all-knowing, and he is the life. And they lived to tell the tale of their incredible journey and come into those peaceful waters. And if we want to come into those peaceful waters, it will depend on who we have on board in our lives. Do you have Jesus Christ on board? If you do, then he is the Prince of Peace, and you will know the peace that only he can bring, whether it be times like this or whether it be sunny days when we're all able to go out and enjoy the weather wherever we go. You see, following someone will take us where we wouldn't otherwise have gone. And that can be a good and a bad thing, as you can reflect on things in your life where you've followed after somebody or got in the wrong queue at the post office and actually regretted that particular choice. I'm sure, and we've mentioned Elvis and his brother who became a minister. I'm sure if his brother could go back now to the mid-1970s, a couple of years before Elvis passed away, I'm sure his brother would try and set him on a different pathway, would try and get him to follow after the Lord Jesus Christ and to change his life around. And who knows, Elvis may still be physically alive today. But just as we finish, I just want to come back to the verse that we had earlier on, because Jesus, in that verse that we read in Matthew 16:24, said, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it," in verse 25. But he said just before that, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me." There must be a determination from us as individuals. There must be a devotion, not one that just lasts for the day, but is intending to last for life. And finally, there must be a declaration. We read in Romans chapter 10, verse 9, that if you confess Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And so we have that choice to make. But there is a price. And as we saw from that verse there that Jesus mentions, we must take up our cross. There will be those that will disown us. There will be those that will maybe not speak to us or stop following us on social media or whatever. But there will be a price to pay. And there was a price that Christ paid for each one of us there on the cross at Calvary. So the Lord is not asking us to do or us to bear anything he hasn't already bore himself when he suffered, to grant us this opportunity of coming into this relationship, which will lead to a place of peace way beyond this dimension we're living in right now. So we choose. So thanks for listening today, and we trust it's been a blessing, and we hope to conclude this time next week with this particular series. We'll see you from the garage on Sunday, God willing, for the Gospel from the Garage in that particular series on the Gospel. And thank you for your feedback on social media, on WhatsApp, and the feedback that you've left below some of the videos shared on this particular channel. Please keep praying for those that we've been praying for. We think of Debbie up in Yorkshire and Debbie in Cardiff and others that really need our blessing at this time, the national health workers and those on the front line and those that they're doing all that they're doing despite the dangers around us. Let's keep on praying and thanking the Lord for them. And if you can share some of the links that I've given you below. I'm going to put another link today for this particular one. Didn't work last time. I think we had too many links on that particular day, but I recommended this Choose Life daily devotional. I'll put a link to this under the video today, and you'll find that really, really helpful. And one other one, there was a film that I saw this week called Heaven is for Real, of a 4-year-old boy that actually believed that he'd been to heaven, and it was recommended to me by a preacher in Hereford, and a tremendous film. We watched it, and a true story from America, and I'll leave a link to that underneath. And if you've not seen that, then I really encourage you to watch that as well. So anyway, you have a good week, end of the week, and God willing, see you on Sunday. Take care now.